Hi, I'm Amy Hager, and today I'll be covering our research on understanding machine learning practitioners' data documentation perceptions, needs, challenges, and desiderata. So, a machine learning model is only as good as the data set it's trained on, and we know that data sets can be problematic for many different reasons. So, researchers and practitioners have begun to advocate for an increase in data set documentation. So this encourages dataset owners to carefully reflect on their dataset makeup, creation, and the potential risks or implications of its use. On the other side, it also provides dataset consumers, maybe looking to train or evaluate a model, information to help them make an informed decision about using a dataset. Overall, this then facilitates responsible AI through increased dataset transparency, accountability, and reproducibility. So as you can see, there's been a few different dataset documentation frameworks that have been proposed. So maybe you've heard of datasheets or nutrition labels. However, we know very little about how effective they are. And this is especially true at understanding whether they meet the needs of industry machine learning practitioners. A space where we know it can be very difficult to apply broader responsible AI principles into more concrete on the ground practices. And further, the existing frameworks right now don't really distinguish between industrial and academic use cases. So we don't know if there's different needs perhaps between documenting an internal proprietary data set versus, let's say, a researcher doing a shared benchmark data set. So our research takes the perspective of the data set creator and looks at their creation of the collaborative artifact of documentation, and specifically have them do a data documentation exercise and get their feedback, and use this to inform then some design requirements that can hopefully help improve future data set documentation frameworks. To do this, we focused on two research questions. So the first was, how do industry machine learning practitioners currently approach data set documentation, if at all? And then the second was to see what their perceptions, needs, challenges, and desiderata were concerning filling out a data set documentation exercise. So to do this, we had 14 machine learning practitioners as participants from 4 separate teams from one large technology company. And they're varied in roles from data scientists, software engineer, researchers. And so first we just conducted a preliminary interview. And in this, we just asked them about their current practices and challenges with documenting data sets. And then from there, we had participants complete a data documentation exercise. And so this is where they filled out a form containing the full set of the data sheets for data sets questions on a machine learning data set that they had recently worked with. And this allowed us to elicit feedback, which we collected during a follow-up interview to kind of gather their perceptions on the documentation and any needs, challenges, and desiderata they had. So for the first research question concerning their current practices of data set documentation, participants said that they're quite fragmented and ad hoc. So they were more informal. So participants wrote down things for themselves, but and were sufficient for their own needs, but said that they probably needed to do more for others. And also mentioned some assets that were designated for documenting data sets, but then also using a lot of other assets which don't serve the main purpose of providing information about data sets. Further, they had a more myopic approach to data set documentation, in the sense that they really focused on practicality and efficiency. So they believe that documentation should provide like short-term functional benefits, like the immediate, like, am I able to use this data set or not? And that these benefits had to outweigh any effort it took to create the documentation. For a second research question, kind of finding out about perceptions, needs, challenges, and desiderata, I'm just going to preview a few of our results. So there's a lot more here, and we want to encourage you to go read the paper. And here I'll just be giving an example of 1 or 2 findings under each section. So regarding perceptions, participants said that they saw data documentation as being beneficial. One thing they mentioned was the reduced risk in losing information. This was especially true for if coworkers left. Oftentimes information goes with them and that this documentation would maintain that. They also said it'd help with data set discoverability and possibly like onboarding other teams or new hires onto their data sets. When it came to needs and challenges, we were quite surprised to see that participants really didn't make the connection between the data documentation exercise and the responsible AI, responsible AI. So they didn't really naturally see that connection until we prompted them to think about how responsible AI was tied to it. And in fact, some participants gave feedback that they felt that certain questions that weren't so useful happen to be these questions that have direct relevance to responsible AI implications. Further, we noticed there is uncertainty about the target audience of documentation of data sets. So oftentimes people filled it out in regards to what they would need and want documented, but this led to missing details and information that someone unfamiliar with the data set would need. These both informed kind of design requirements in that there should be more explicit connection provided for participants and guidance about how dataset characteristics do tie to responsible AI, and also, prompt them to think about who would be reading the data documentation so that they're comprehensive enough. When it came to desiderata, participants said they wanted data sheets or data documentation frameworks, to be interactive and to be integrated in their current workflows. And specifically, participants brought up concerns about data documentation being static and not up to date. And so some saw automation as the solution for this problem, especially those who worked with streaming data sets that are dynamic and changing. However, adding automation shouldn't be a catch-all, as the main goal of data documentation is to kind of facilitate that more deliberate reflection on data sets. This slide covers the 7 design requirements that were informed by our results of the project and aimed at kind of improving the collaborative artifact that is data set documentation frameworks. And then also I want to highlight that we're continuing to build on these results and have generated an updated data set documentation template that you can see on our project webpage. And also want to say that please reach out for further discussion with me or any of my fellow co-authors. Thanks for your time.